Nearly one-fifth of the entire world's oil supply passes through a single stretch of water every single day, one choke point, one narrow corridor. And the people who control access to it or threaten it hold enormous power over your daily life, whether you realize it or not. Today, that corridor became a battlefield. A massive explosion tore through the calm surface of the Arabian Gulf. Flames erupted from the deck of a large oil tanker, making its way through one of the most strategically critical shipping lanes on the planet. Sailors on nearby vessels watched a fireball climb into the sky. Maritime radio channels flooded with alarm signals. Distress calls began echoing across the Gulf within minutes. And just like that, one of the most sensitive energy routes in the entire world became the center of a dangerous and rapidly escalating international incident. Iranian media wasted no time. Naval forces connected to Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed full responsibility for the strike. Iranian officials stated clearly that the vessel, a U.S.-linked oil tanker navigating the northern Persian Gulf, had been successfully hit, left burning in the water, and that the attack was a deliberate act of retaliation in the growing confrontation playing out across the region. That announcement did not stay regional for long. It sent shockwaves through global financial markets and military command centers simultaneously. Now, let's stop for just a moment, because it's worth being honest about what this actually means. This is not simply a story about one ship catching fire somewhere far away. This is a story about power, leverage, and the very real consequences that land directly in your wallet. When a tanker burns in the Persian Gulf, diesel prices in the United States don't go down, they go up. And they already have, but we'll get to that. First, let's understand exactly where this happened and why the location matters so much. The tanker was traveling through waters that function as the central artery of global energy trade. Every single day, massive vessels loaded with crude oil move through this corridor, carrying millions upon millions of barrels toward international markets. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, all of them export enormous quantities of oil through these same waters. Those tankers funnel through the narrow Strait of Hormuz before continuing onward toward refineries scattered across the globe. That strait is not just a shipping lane. It is one of the most important choke points in the history of modern trade. Nearly one-fifth of the world's entire oil supply moves through it every day without interruption. Until now. When something happens in that corridor, a military clash, a disruption, a tanker strike, energy markets do not wait for a press briefing. They react instantly. That is exactly what happened here. Iranian officials were direct in describing this attack as a message. Iranian state media reported that naval forces had targeted the tanker deliberately with clear intent. The purpose, according to Iranian commanders, was to signal that ships associated with their adversaries would not continue moving freely through Gulf waters if hostilities continued. Read that again carefully. Iranian commanders publicly stated that commercial vessels connected to their adversaries are now legitimate targets in an active confrontation. That is not a vague threat buried in a diplomatic cable. That is an open declaration about the waters that carry a significant portion of the world's energy supply. The tanker itself began sending emergency distress signals shortly after the explosion ripped through its hull. Flames spread across sections of the ship as the crew worked frantically to control the fire and prevent further catastrophe. Nearby vessels monitored the situation closely. Maritime authorities scrambled to coordinate emergency response efforts. And while all of that was unfolding on the water, analysts in financial capitals around the world were already asking the question that matters most to ordinary people. What does this do to the global economy? The answer is straightforward, and it is not good. Energy markets are built on one foundational assumption: stability, predictable supply routes, reliable shipping lanes. When a tanker is struck in one of the world's most critical corridors, traders begin calculating risk. And the risk they are calculating is this: if one tanker was hit today, how many could be hit tomorrow? If attacks continue, does the flow of oil through the region slow down? Does it stop? How bad does this get? The reaction from energy traders came fast. Within hours of the first reports emerging, oil futures markets began climbing. Fear spread that the conflict could directly interfere with global supply chains. Traders started pricing in the very real possibility that the Persian Gulf could become unsafe territory for commercial shipping. And when traders start pricing in that kind of uncertainty, the effects move quickly from markets to the real world. Shipping companies began slowing their vessels, awaiting updated security guidance. Maritime organizations issued urgent warnings that ships traveling through the region should exercise extreme caution. And then the insurance industry got involved. War risk insurance, required for any commercial vessel operating in a conflict zone, began to be reassessed. When tensions escalate in a region like this, those insurance premiums do not hold steady. They climb, sometimes dramatically, and when it costs more to insure a tanker traveling through the Gulf, that cost does not disappear, it gets passed on. Eventually, it reaches you. The United States began feeling these effects almost immediately. Energy markets inside the country reacted as traders processed the implications of a potential disruption to global supply chains. And here is the number that matters most right now. Diesel prices surged sharply, climbing past $4 per gallon for the first time in nearly 2 years. That happened because of this conflict, because of this strike, because of decisions made thousands of miles away in a region most Americans may not think about until the price at the pump reminds them why it matters. Let's be honest about what a diesel price spike actually means, because it is easy to hear that number and assume it only affects truckers or industrial companies. It does not. Diesel fuel powers the backbone of the American economy. The trucks that deliver food to your grocery store run on diesel. The freight trains that carry goods from manufacturers to distribution centers across the country depend on diesel engines. The farming equipment that plants and harvests the crops that feed this nation runs on diesel. When diesel becomes more expensive, every one of those costs increases. Transportation costs go up. Food delivery becomes more expensive. Shipping prices climb. Manufacturing costs rise. Inflation pressures build. And suddenly, a tanker strike in the Persian Gulf is not a distant geopolitical event. It is a factor in what you pay for groceries on a Tuesday afternoon. Energy analysts are not being subtle about the potential consequences if this situation continues to deteriorate. The Strait of Hormuz is not a corridor the global economy can simply reroute around. When shipping through that strait becomes dangerous or restricted, global oil supplies tighten. There is no easy alternative path. Recent data already shows that the broader conflict in the region has forced some vessels to avoid the Gulf entirely, rerouting at enormous cost and delay. Oil prices have already climbed significantly on fears of prolonged conflict and shipping disruption. The forecasts being discussed by serious analysts right now are not reassuring. Some projections suggest crude oil could approach the $100 per barrel mark if disruptions in the region continue at the current pace or intensify. $100 per barrel. Think about what that means at the pump. Gasoline prices would surge sharply. Diesel prices would climb even further than they already have. Airline tickets would increase as jet fuel costs rise. Shipping rates for everything from electronics to furniture would go up. The ripple effects from one sustained conflict in one critical shipping lane would spread across every corner of the American economy. Meanwhile, military forces across the region moved into a heightened state of alert following the tanker strike. The United States Navy maintains a significant and deliberate presence in the Gulf. That presence exists for one primary purpose: to protect shipping routes and ensure the uninterrupted flow of energy supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. Following reports of the attack, naval patrols intensified. Warships began monitoring shipping lanes with greater scrutiny. Surveillance aircraft began scanning the waters for additional threats. The military response was immediate and visible. But here is the honest challenge that military planners face in a situation like this. The Gulf is not an open battlefield with clear front lines. It is a crowded and complex waterway filled with oil tankers, cargo ships, fishing vessels, and military assets all sharing the same narrow corridors. Protecting every commercial vessel traveling through the region simultaneously is an extraordinarily difficult task. That is precisely why tanker attacks have historically been among the most destabilizing developments in any maritime conflict. They do not simply threaten one ship. They threaten the confidence of the entire system that keeps global energy moving. And that strategic calculation is not accidental. The strike on this tanker sent a precise and deliberate message. It demonstrated that the conflict is no longer confined to military installations or land-based targets. Energy infrastructure is now directly in the crosshairs for Iran. Disrupting oil shipments is not just a military tactic, it is an economic weapon. By threatening the global energy supply, Iran can apply pressure on adversaries that goes well beyond any battlefield exchange. It reaches into financial markets. It reaches into fuel prices. It reaches into the daily economic lives of ordinary people in countries that have never been anywhere near the Gulf. For the United States and its allies, tanker attacks represent something beyond a military provocation. They represent a direct assault on the architecture of global commerce. That is why this kind of incident carries escalatory risk that far exceeds the physical damage to any single vessel. The rest of the world is watching this very carefully. Energy importing nations across Asia and Europe depend heavily on oil flowing through these waters. Countries that have built their entire industrial infrastructure around reliable and affordable energy imports are now calculating what a prolonged Gulf disruption means for their own economies. Some governments maintain strategic petroleum reserves designed to provide a buffer during supply disruptions, but those reserves are finite. They are not a permanent solution. If the conflict drags on, even well-stocked reserves will not be sufficient to stabilize markets indefinitely. Back in Washington, policymakers are monitoring the situation with growing urgency. Energy costs are not a secondary political concern. They are a primary driver of inflation, economic confidence, and public sentiment. Sharp and sustained increases in gasoline and diesel prices have consequences at the ballot box and at the kitchen table. The White House understands this. Congress understands this. And the people inside the American economy, the ones paying for fuel and food and freight, are beginning to understand it too. The tanker that was struck in the Persian Gulf is still the center of an active international investigation. Maritime authorities are working to determine the full extent of the damage and the precise circumstances of the attack. Ships in the region are being warned to exercise extreme caution. Insurance companies are reassessing risk models in real time. Energy traders are watching every update. Military forces are on alert. And governments around the world are waiting to see what comes next. Here's the bottom line. This is one explosion, one tanker, one moment in a conflict that has been building for a long time. But its consequences are not contained to the Gulf. They are already spreading into shipping lanes, into oil futures markets, into diesel prices at fuel stations across the United States. One well-placed strike in a critical corridor has reminded the entire world of something it tends to forget during periods of stability. The global energy system is not invincible. It runs through choke points. It depends on safe passage. And when that passage is threatened, the consequences travel fast and far. The real question now is not what happened today. It is what happens next. Will this strike remain an isolated act of retaliation? Or is it the opening move in a broader campaign targeting the very foundation of global energy supply? Because if the answer is the latter, what you paid for diesel today may look like a bargain compared to what comes next.